The Miami Dolphins had playoff aspirations and failed miserably. I'm here today to talk about how to fix the Miami Dolphins.
Can we fix it?
First and foremost, let's talk about culture. Now, culture is something that's hard to see from the outside looking in and is based on observations, but I'm going to break it down. First and foremost, I think the culture needs improvement, and I think that starts with harder, more consistent practicing. I will say there was a level of accountability that I wasn't fully sure we would see. We saw players get benched. We heard Mike McDaniel talk about finding players consistently, and still wasn't enough. And I think there just has to be a level of expectations that are met from harder practices. We heard stories that the training camp was more like a summer camp. We heard stories about Tyreek Hill skipping practice. So things like that cannot fly, and I think that starts with the tone that was set in the end of season press conference from Mike McDaniel, and that is something that we're going to have to see. And I think a way to help build the culture is truly just building competition at positions. You can't let some of these guys have free runs to be a starter at their position, because then with that comes some complacency with some of these guys, as Tyreek Hill's very noted that he sometimes just isn't motivated. Like, that is unacceptable. And I'm not even going to wait till later in the video, but I think part of the solution is genuinely trading Tyreek Hill. Obviously, that's a tone setter in and of itself, but he's a guy that is more of a headache off the field. Like, he's more focused about off the field things than on the field things, about building his brand. Like, I understand that, but do it in the off season. But I would be pro trading Tyreek Hill. I think there's a way that this team would get better. Look at how the Buffalo Bills improved by trading Stephon Diggs. I think it's a very similar situation, and I think that's something I'd like to see. But more into personnel moves, I'll get into that later. In terms of where the offense needs to improve, before we talk about personnel, I'm going to talk about the schematics. And I think first and foremost, I would like to see this offense simplified. I think there's a lot of complexities that lead to hesitation and unsuccessful plays happening too often, whether it's a negative run or a negative play or a penalty. There's so many negative plays that help put the Dolphins on their back foot in 2nd and 15 or just bad scenarios. And I think simplifying the offense could help benefit some of these players play quicker. How often do we see it where it's like a backup receiver comes in, they run the wrong route or aren't at the right landmark, or a backup quarterback comes in and the offense can't function at all. So I think some simplification is needed. I think some of the complexity adds is great, but make that a game plan specific thing that you drill down in practice, but don't make it your entire offense based off of it. And we don't need to have as many motions as we do. Like, I like the motions. They're very necessary. It helps keep the defense on their keys. But I think sometimes they overdo it, leading to bad situations to happen. So that's what I would say schematically. And the last thing schematically they need to build to is just a more consistent run game. All the best teams left in the playoffs all have good running attacks, and I think that's a great place to start. And we see it. When this offense is able to successfully run the ball, this offense is extremely hard to start or hard to stop, but there's a consistent time where this offense struggles to get the ground game going. And I know some of that's correlated to the injuries. When Austin Jackson went down is really when we saw this run game diminish, but that's not an excuse. This run game has to be over the hum regardless of who is in there. So I think that's something that's got to be an emphasis for Mike McDaniels to get this ground game going. Now, in terms of personnel moves to help benefit this Dolphins offense, I think obviously we all know about the offensive line, and that is certainly something that needs to be addressed. But that is not the only thing that needs to be addressed, and I think it's a little blown out of the water as to why some of these plays lack success. And part of that is also the inline blocking from tight ends as well as receivers. So overall, I think there needs to be improvement in that. But let's talk offensive line. What do the Dolphins have that is good that we can build upon, and what needs to be addressed? So obviously, Teron Armstead is up in the air. I'd expect him to retire, and if he doesn't, I wouldn't hate if the Dolphins moved on. It's tricky with Teron. He's one of the best tackles in football when healthy, but as we all know, he can't stay healthy. And this isn't the Teron Armstead issue. His body is kind of just giving out on him, which sucks. But when he's on the field, he's a stud. So it's like, do you get rid of him, or do you just have him? You know you're not going to have him completely, and you have a plan in place. I don't know the answer to that question, but for the sake of this video, let's say Teron Armstead retires. I think you can feel pretty confident with Patrick Paul and Austin Jackson being your starting tackles. We saw Patrick Paul develop throughout the season and continue to get better. He's a guy with a high floor that, with continued development, I think can become a very good player. He's going to need some playing time. With that said, there needs to be a plan in place to create competition as well as just have a good backup plan, because as we saw it. When you don't have good tackle play in this offense, the offensive line looks way worse than people say with the current guard play. So there has to be a good plan in place to have good backups in place for the tackle position. And one way to do that, I've seen people suggest, is you go out in the draft and draft a tackle and kick Austin Jackson, for example, inside to guard. So that way you have two starting tackles, and then if someone goes down, you can move Austin Jackson out in a pinch because he obviously has excelled in that position. If you don't go that route, I think you just make sure you have a good plan in place for a swing tackle on the roster. Someone like Kendall Lamb, who is a very good swing tackle for us, but obviously is going to retire. So someone like that must be in place for the tackle position. In terms of the guards, the position the Dolphins have obviously neglected needs to be addressed. They need to get two starting level guards. The good news about that is getting good guard play isn't always very expensive. I don't think the Dolphins should or need to go out and sign a top of the market guard like a Trey Smith to a massive deal. I think you can get quality guard play in free agency for the $5 to $10 million range, and I think you can get quality guard play in the draft throughout the draft, whether it's day 2 or day 3. So I'd like to see the Dolphins spend a day 2 pick on a guard and sign one in free agency for like a $5 to $8 million contract. I think you bring back someone, whether it's Liam Eichenberg or Robert Jones, as depth. Keyword, depth. I'm not saying they should start, but I think with the scheme familiarity in a pinch, I don't think they're the worst option. So I think that's how the offensive line should be addressed. You need to upgrade both guard positions, and you must have a backup tackle plan in place, whether that's drafting a tackle, moving someone inside, or just having a good plan in place to back up the tackles. The other thing that I would like to see be addressed for this Miami Dolphins offense is improvement at the wide tight end, the position that Julian Hill most primarily played. Now, I will say I think Julian Hill got too much flack from the fan base because obviously there were some noticeable mistakes from him, but he also did a good job. I saw him put 300-pounders on their back, so there were some good plays from Julian Hill, but I think he was just asked to do too soon. So I think taking some load off of his plate and drafting somebody or bringing somebody in to be your primary inside inline tight end that, once again, Julian Hill can rotate in. So many teams rotate in their tight ends. I think Julian Hill should absolutely be on this roster. I just don't think he should probably be that every down guy unless he continues to develop, as he was an undrafted guy in year 2. So we're going to get continued development from Julian Hill, but I would like to see that position upgraded. Maybe somebody like Tyler Warren in the draft. I think that would be a tremendous player for this scheme. He's going to require your first-round picks, so whether you're comfortable or not to do that, there's obviously other players throughout the draft that they can look to add, but that is something that we need to see improved. And then obviously, if you do move off of Tyreek Hill, you're going to need to upgrade receiver. I don't think you need to go get a top-of-the-line guy. I think, once again, the Bills are a perfect example. They don't really have a superstar. I feel confident about Jalen Waddle being able to be our wide receiver 1. I feel very confident in Mike Washington to be another guy. But I think there's just someone else that's required. I'd prefer to be a bigger body, obviously for a bigger target, but also to be able to be consistently better in the run game, which is something that's so important in this offense. So somebody like a Nick Westbrook-Akina from the Titans, or Allen Lazard, who's likely going to be a cap casualty. We saw him block the Dolphins very well. Allen Lazard is my kind of crush in free agency if he does get released. I think he'd be a great fit for this offense, and somebody I'd like to see added if we move off of Tyreek Hill. In terms of the defense, obviously there's going to be a lot of unknown. Currently, Anthony Weaver has interviewed for some head coaching jobs. Whether or not he gets it, I'm not sure. There's been another head coach opening with Dallas, so it might create more demand for Anthony Weaver, who I think very highly of as a coach, and I could very well see him getting a head coaching job. So obviously some of this is dependent on scheme. With that said, the Dolphins have a lot of holes on their defense, as a lot of players were on one-year deals. With that said, similar to the guard position, I think a lot of them can be brought back as well as just addressed for cheap, specifically the defensive line. Like, we lose Benito Jones and Deshaun Hand. I think those are two guys you bring back, and they're not going to cost you a lot of money. In terms of the linebackers, I think you bring back Terrell Dotson, but as I mentioned, we want competition. I think a great example of this is that defensive line. They went into training camp unknown who was going to be paired up with Zach Sealer and Calais Campbell, and they kind of fought to the death, and Deshaun Hand and Benito Jones won out, and they performed very well this season. And I think, once again, you bring back Tyrell Dotson, you bring in some competition through the draft or through a lower expense free agent, and let them battle it out. Like, don't have set players set to start for your roster. Create competition everywhere and let them battle it out. Safety, obviously that entire room is getting overhauled. Jordan Poyer and Javon Holland, both free agents. I expect Javon Holland to get a pretty big payday in free agency, so I think the Dolphins are going to need to look to improve everywhere. But once again, I think, thankfully, like, safeties, you can pretty much get quality safeties all throughout the draft. We see it. I mean, look in the playoffs. There's a lot of safety play that weren't top picks, and they're just good players that developed over time. So I would like to see the Dolphins pair up a rookie with a veteran player in free agency. Once again, you can get quality safety play for not premium money. I think a perfect example of that is Deshaun Elliott last year was a stud for us, and we signed him to like a $2 or $3 million deal, and he signed for like $5 million with the Steelers. So you can get quality safety play and not have to pay top end money. So I would say both safety positions need to be addressed. I think you need to just create competition in the linebacker room to pair up with Jordan Brooks. You're going to need to improve the interior defensive line with a lot of free agents as well as Calais Campbell likely not returning. The edge position's obviously up in the air. What happens is Bradley Chubb going to get released. If he doesn't, you have much less of a need at the edge position, but you're obviously still going to want to bring back some depth. I think Quentin Bell and Tyus Bowser would be good guys to bring back to compete for a roster spot. And then in terms of the cornerback position, I think it's pretty well positioned. If you bring back Kader Kohou, you have Ramsey, Kohou, Fuller, you have some young guys they have a lot of faith in that are going to continue to develop throughout camp. So overall for the defense, I would just say it's just to create competition everywhere. I don't think they have like high expense needs on this defense. I think they just need to bring in competition through assets through the draft and cheaper level free agents and make the best guys win out at their position. And I think that's how you make this roster better and how you ultimately get over that hump is just create competition everywhere, make the cream rise to the top, and get the best play from everybody. Hopefully that includes Anthony Weaver staying as the Dolphins defensive coordinator. In terms of special teams, we fired special teams coordinator Danny Crossman, so hopefully we finally see improvement in terms of that. But overall, that is how I think the Miami Dolphins should fix themselves. Comment your thoughts on how you think that should go down below. I appreciate you guys for watching. Like and subscribe to help the channel grow. And until next time, fins up.